Hi, welcome to the Political Forum Podcast. This is episode number 6. For each episode, we bring on a special guest to talk about our ever-increasingly complex world, and we try to make sense of it all. Before I introduce you to our guest, I want to give a shout out to our team. Joining us while he's on break from his tour of duty is my friend John Crowell. Hey, John.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well, thanks. And also joining us from the West Coast is Anat. Hello. So tonight's guest is Darius. He was born in Edison, New Jersey, but has lived in Newark most of his life. He attended the NJIT School of Management for bachelor's, and he attended the Catholic University in Lyon, France for his master's in international business administration. Darius is also an amateur economist, political junkie, software developer, and Dogecoin investors. Hey, Darius, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you. So, what's happening this summer?
Well, went fishing, bird watching, visited Stamford, Connecticut. That was nice. I actually got to see the TV station where they film Maury and Springer. That was nice. No chairs were thrown, but I might be back in time to see them get thrown again. So we're hopeful. I'm glad reopening is in full swing. Hopefully this Delta virus doesn't put a hamper on things.
So during the pandemic, how has it affected your personal life, if any?
Oh, I hated the pandemic. I put on 40 pounds last year. I struggled like hell to lose it all. Ironically, I put a little bit back on after my birthday, but I'll tell you, that pandemic was rough on everyone for a multitude of reasons. Like, I took it very seriously in the early months, not just for my own well-being, but for my mom and my family members. But after a while, it started feeling like a sick joke when people were being arrested for not socially distancing. State governments in New Jersey, New York, California were letting out violent criminals, but hassling small business owners, people who wanted to open and go to the gym, people who wanted to go to the church. And of course, suppression of free speech and protest. I mean, if you wanted to protest for Black Lives Matter, it was okay. You didn't have to wear your mask. But if you protested the lockdowns or anything else, the state got on you. And of course, as an amateur economist, in hindsight, I'm of the opinion the lockdown should have never even happened. Like, I'm of the opinion the whole world should have pulled one big Sweden or South Dakota, where we basically quarantined the very sick and let everyone else go on about their business. Because between the massive unemployment, between the explosion of national debt, and one of the biggest unintended consequences was the potential starvation of 100 million people in the third world. There were a lot of negative externalities. And the sad thing, in spite of the lockdowns, the COVID casualties were still fairly high. That's mainly because quarantining people in their homes and apartments makes it very easy to spread the virus in dense areas, horizontally packed, not vertically. So, yeah.
Well, if you're going to quarantine people for being infected, how would you tell during the early days?
No, not quarantine people who are infected, quarantine the most likely to be vulnerable, like the very elderly, people who have had surgeries, the very morbidly obese. Other than that, everyone else, they should have just made sure to wash their hands, eat better, stay fit. That's really the best thing you can do, because, I mean, the overall probability of surviving COVID was 99% across the board. But for the older population and the very obese, I believe some stats say 95% survival. Obviously, they were more at risk. So it would make sense to encourage those people, look, we'll help you quarantine. we'll bring you food, we'll give you money, resources to stay at home so you're less likely to contract the virus. But everyone else, you have to get on with your life, because the explosion in isolation, especially among young people, was very difficult to hear. Like suicide rates, which had already been going up in recent years, went even higher for young people and other people in general. Like a lot of people experienced loneliness, crippling loneliness for the first time, and it wasn't a nice feeling. So I know I'm getting a little scatterbrained, but I guess I'm going a little off topic. I know we were talking about the student loan issue, but the COVID crisis really made a lot of people evaluate their lives. One of the silver linings was a lot of people took a step back and said, do I want to work here? Do I want to go to school here? Really, I mean, the great resignation as it's happening, people in a lot of low service jobs are thinking, do I really want to work here? Do I really want to do this? So that was one positive. Another was many children were forced to attend distant learning online, and parents are starting to question the curriculum that a lot of children are learning, particularly with the trans issue and critical race theory. And it's creating a lot of conversations at the dinner table. And I'm of the opinion that school choice is good, not just for improving education outcomes and better preparing the youth for the workforce, but also many parents do not like certain values being taught to their children. So they need to take a more active role. You might remember this from the debate on whether the state should be involved in education. Even though it wasn't supposed to be a school choice debate, it kind of morphed into that. So basically, the COVID lockdowns were mostly bad with a few silver linings. That was my opinion.
Yeah, I wanted to throw something in here too about the virtual online. So this is what absolutely kills me, and you'll probably relate to this. There's been a lot of people, and I know some of them, philosophers and people in the field of education and scientific literacy, who've been really pitching for years the idea of using virtual, not just virtual reality, but virtual learning courses to teach critical thinking using the most up-to-date, effective learning methods. And so there's this idea that critical thinking can't be taught. That's BS, it can. I mean, people have to be receptive to it, but you can absolutely teach people, especially younger kids, basics of logical thinking, fallacies, questioning things, looking for evidence, things that will literally save lives, including during a pandemic. And we saw how science denial on wherever it's coming from on whatever issue really does get people killed, whether it's people denying the reality of COVID, or it's people not, like you said, not looking at the externalities, the hidden layers of suffering like suicide and social isolation, poverty, and all the the massive death toll that comes with poverty itself. So science denial, literally, we've seen in the last year or so, it actually has a body count. Denying science costs lives, and learning to critically think and ask questions and understand how to reason, not just saves lives, but could be the framework for a better society. And we've had people that have been pitching this idea forever about, we have virtual ability to teach this. And the pandemic was the perfect opportunity to teach countless millions of kids critical thinking. I mean, just give them the basic building blocks, take a generation and equip it with the ability to critically think. That to me is more important in securing a free society and a prosperous society, where it's just as important as having a military or having a police force. And yet we completely wasted that opportunity. No one cares or listens to people promoting critical thinking. So that's my I don't know.
But I would agree. I think online learning can be amazing for people if that option will be more beneficial. Like obviously AI, machine learning, new innovative things. But I think the problem was you still had the same incompetent education establishment trying to implement online. It's like the same people who suck in person are gonna suck online. So We would kind of need other people to do the online learning, like Khan Academy, EDX, Udacity.
Well, I think our education system can be hybrid. I think there are definitely some good teachers that are very good at teaching, and there's some that suck, and there's a range in between. I think we should, recruit teachers and train them extremely well, make them just as respected as any other branch of service, pay them well, but train them well, select them well, and also combine it with some private sector innovation and nonprofit innovation. So if you're going to teach online, allow, kind of outsource that to the best minds and the best kind of innovation, and then partner with the school system. It shouldn't go through this rigid top-down bureaucracy. It should be very horizontal, and we should have the best people in that field. And I think most teachers who are really serious about teaching would agree that would be a much better system than the archaic dumpster fire that we have now, which does a disservice to, I think, teachers and students alike.
All right.
Well, I think that goes to the core of the problem. If you go to other westernized or modern nations, I mean, being a public sector employee, being a government employee is something of an honor, it's something of like a dignified position. I think it's a uniquely American phenomenon where if you are on the payroll of the government, it's almost looked down upon as like, there's something wrong with you and you're kind of like just, living up the system. If you go to any other nations, whether if you're a postal worker, working for the utilities, to being a public school teacher, it's one of the most dignified positions, and they pay their, those staff very well with generous pensions. And there's a sense of duty when these people go to work, as opposed to in the U.S. I think people almost have this kind of a entitlement type of mindset if you're a government employee. So I think that kind of attitude.
I'd like to respond to that because I actually used to work for the government. You see, the thing is, that myth of the underpaid teacher is one of the biggest lies our culture has shilled. See, the thing is, government workers in general, whether you're a cop, a firefighter, a low-level civil service employee, including teachers, you are not paid for meritocracy. You're paid based on the years in the system, because most government jobs are almost exclusively organized by a public sector union. So it's like the only thing that will raise your initial salary is like having another degree on your belt. And when you start in the system, you'll make 40, 50K depending on your district. Now, after 10, 20 years, then you'll start making the high 5 figs or 6 figs. It's not all like the private sector where if you're a really skilled programmer or a data scientist or a mathematician, you work for the best company and make 100, 150K starting out. It's not like that at all. And the thing is, my mom was a school teacher, so I've heard the establishment school system arguments that, well, there are bad teachers, yeah, there's problems, because as someone who's advocated school choice, I'm aware how the establishment will argue. They'll always admit there are problems, but none of the teachers themselves will ever say, I'm that bad teacher. I'm that incompetent teacher that doesn't care about a child's development. Like the whole system is the problem. And I guess in America, especially with conservatives who are more anti-government than the left, you see the lionization of police and military. Like the police and military who are government agents are seen as heroes, but the teachers are just seen as bureaucrats. Like, as far as the Constitution goes, the most important government agents are the police and military because they fulfill the government's role of protecting society, maintaining rule of law, keeping criminals and foreign invaders in check. Every other government agent is basically superfluous. Like if you had Ron Paul or Ronald Reagan from the 60s, they would literally tell you, outside of police and military and judges, every other government employee is basically superfluous, should just be outsourced to the private sector. Because the thing is, law and order has to have a government actor to be impartial. But every other job in society is better off with the private sector because now you can have choice, you can have differences. Like in law, you need uniformity. You need a uniform standard for everyone to be more or less treated the same and protected as a public good. But when it comes to education, food consumption, housing, we're different. We have different needs, different aptitudes, different desires, so we deserve different choices. We can't have different justice.
Actually, according to the Constitution, I guess two jobs that are guaranteed, that are enshrined in the Constitution. It's the U.S. Postal Service. That's in the Constitution. And
Obviously,
three,
male, but
Lawyer, everybody needs a lawyer if you go to jail.
yeah. And also, look, we have the interstate commerce system, and I mean, the framers of the Constitution and all the laws that came after it pay tremendous level of deference to the
hold
commerce.
on, I'll be right back. Hold on.
Yeah. So, I mean, you need, the public roadways and the infrastructure to maintain that, because I mean, that's really the bloodline of the U.S. economy. So, if that goes by the wayside, then I think you're not going to really have a functioning interstate commerce system. So, for what it's worth, that's also one of the guarantees, or at least one of the mandates from the Constitution. So it seems like, Darius, one of your criticism is against teachers' unions. Did I describe that correctly?
Yes. I mean, teachers' unions are known for being corrupt. They're known for being opposed to competition. Whenever school choice debates prop up, they're literally standing in the way of children's development, because it seems like if you criticize a failing school that they control and you say you want a child to go to a better school, then the question really is this debate, is this system supposed to be built for the interest of the child or the union? Because the thing is, unions historically, they've never advocated for the consumer of the industry. They've always advocated for the interests of the workers, particularly the workers that are members of the union. You'll never hear the UAW workers say, we need lower prices for the consumer to make our cars attractive. They will always lobby for more benefits that always yield higher prices, notwithstanding improvements to technology. You'll never hear Teamsters Union say, we need more free trade to lower the prices of consumer goods. I mean, think of technology, because the topic of higher education, you could take any industry that's heavily government regulated, either totally or very heavily. Education, housing, healthcare, and contrary to popular belief, Wall Street. They have all become very inflated in the last 50 years. They're all more expensive. We're all complaining about them. Now take consumer technology. Let's go back 1965 when the higher education bill was passed, the law that enabled the federal government to give student loans out as part of LBJ's Great Society. 1965. The average cost of a college education, I believe it was in the neighborhood of $2,000, a few $100s. I have to check my figures, but it was exceptionally cheap. You heard this story. I paid for my college with a summer job. 1965. The average cost of a computer was, I believe, $2-3 million. The big back computer size computers that IBM would make, but they couldn't really do much. They were just big clunky calculators for eggheads. Now fast forward, the average computer, which we're all using right now, is what, $200, maybe $300. It has GPS, it has internet, you can play video games, you can write your Word, you can do your Excel, your PowerPoint. It got better, and it's 10,000 times cheaper. Same with our TVs. Even if you were a rich person, you only had a little box TV with 3 channels. Now you can be broke with a Roku TV streaming Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, watching Rick and Morty on cable and South Park on HBO Max. Now look at housing, 10 times more expensive. We're all complaining about rent. I don't know who that guy is, but he's like, the rent is too damn high.
Oh,
That's
that
because
guy.
of rent. That's because
Jamie
of rent.
McMillan. James
Yeah, I know, a
McMillan.
black guy with the beard, glasses. Okay. That's because of rent control, housing regulations, subsidization of housing under FDR, Community Reinvestment Act, Fair Credit Housing Act under Clinton, George Bush and Obama bailing out the housing industry. Like all those things artificially prop up housing. Healthcare, going back to the 60s, Medicaid, Medicare. Someone like Ron Paul will tell you before Medicaid, Medicare, community hospitals would take care of the poor. But now the government artificially pays for senior and poor people's health care. And we also have the insurance market being propped up with lack of competition 50 years later. I mean, it's very silly for people to say we need to get rid of Obamacare. We probably should, but we didn't exactly have a free market in healthcare before Obamacare. But I know I'm getting off topic, but the point is, look at those areas of the economy which were very free market. We saw 1,000 times cost reductions, real economy of scale, mass production. Now look at those areas that are very government regulated. We saw increased prices, reduced quality, or a mixture of both. Like, think about it. If housing was operating in the same way as computer technology, the average home would not be $350,000. It'll probably be $35. Sure, it might be a little tiny home, but wouldn't you want a tiny home for like $100 instead of a regular home for $300,000?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like the idea of the micro homes where people build their own house and it's like really small. It's like a hobbit lives there, but they basically cut the price down by an order of magnitude. And they have
basically what if the average home never really increased? Like, what if the average home was still $20,000 even in today's money? Wouldn't you rather the average home be 20 grand instead of 300,000?
Yeah. People aren't happier because of a giant house. They're happier because they're financially stable.
I mean, hell, the McMansion would probably only be $50,000. Wouldn't you want a McMansion for 50 grand?
Yeah. No,
Oh, to
absolutely.
be fair, that Darius, I think you have a lot of flippers in the real estate market would gladly take that $50,000 whatever McMansion, turn that around and charge 10 times, and there will be somebody in the market willing to pay for it.
No, but what I'm saying is mass production lowers the average unit cost. Like,
Well, I think real estate is kind of a unique thing because there are finite.
No. The law of economics is the same for any industry. The more available something is, the cheaper it is. The less available, the more expensive it is. Like take rent control with apartments. If you're lucky enough to qualify for a rent control apartment, you can get away with paying $20 or $100. But only so many people can get that apartment because supply controls and price controls go hand in hand. No real estate developer is deliberately going to build apartments for less than their cost. So they can only make so much space. And all the regulation with zoning boards, rent control, etc. They only create so much new housing. So while if you get on rent control, you're lucky to pay your low rent, but everyone else is paying higher rents. Whereas we should just build more housing and lower the cost of rents and homes.
Actually, I think this is an area where progressives and conservatives and libertarians sort of converge without realizing it. So I lived in New York for about a good number of years, including in an apartment that was very much partly subjected to like market rent or rent stabilization or some combination, and also rent control. And we didn't know exactly what the deal was with every single apartment unit in the building, but the upkeep was absolutely terrible. It was a dumpster fire experiment and failed policy of how apartments and landlord relationships are supposed to work. It I mean, the roof is about to collapse, and you know, I was paying like $2,400 a month. It was definitely just a case study in a lot of the failed way that New York City apartments work. I mean, New York is one of the worst cities for this, along with San Francisco. And I think that most economists, including your more left-leaning economists, I might be wrong, but I think they tend to be opposed to rent control, even if they like it emotionally. They'll admit economically it's not a good idea. I'm not saying there's never a case for rent control.
No,
but,
I feel you. Paul Krugman, who
Yeah.
is one of the biggest Keynesian economists, even he has admitted how problematic rent control is. But the problem is, I believe the great Thomas Sowell said it best: bad economics is usually good politics. It's like take minimum wage, for example. The minimum wage law was started by white racists to keep blacks and low-skilled workers out of jobs. But due to ignorance and crummy education on the subject, if you oppose minimum wage hikes, you're not seen as enlightened or academically inclined to help the low-skilled worker. You're seen as hurting the low-skilled worker.
Right. Well, do you think like building more houses, like to some degree, having more public housing could be a good alternative to rent control, which would increase the supply, be an option for people who can't afford to live in market rent? And I've heard progressive economists advocate this as an alternative to rent control. And I think this might be an area where people across the spectrum could agree, because you have a mixed use economy, you have a sort of, or a mixed use sort of city, like Jane Jacobs advocated back in the 50s, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. It's good when a city has a lot of different
wasn't Jacob
combination, right?
Wasn't Jacob Javits known for eminent domain to build parks and projects? Like, wasn't he known for slum removal and urban renewal, which pushed out poor people? I'm thinking of someone from New York. He was like the kingpin.
Well, I was talking about Jane Jacobs, but you talk about the guy who built is the Javits Center related to this guy Javits?
No, I think Javits was a governor. I think Darius is thinking about Robert Moses, who was like the real power broker.
Oh yeah,
there's a very famous, legendary, like 1,000+ biography written by I forget the author's name. I think it's Dan Cairo. I think he wrote a book called The Power Broker, and we actually had a book club discussion on that. You know, Robert Moses was never elected to any public office. He held that position from like being the parks commissioner to the developer for the whole city for a span of about 5 decades. And the legacy of Moses still is with us today, because when you go to the Bronx, it's all highways. And that was Robert Moses' vision of what the future of cities are going to be, which is, you know, it's a future of automobiles in the cities. And you had somebody like Jane Jacobs, which John had mentioned. She was more of like a communitarian. She wanted to block that because she really wanted to focus on each, you know, neighborhood as like its own like social fabric. And a lot of those things were being demolished in the name of development.
Like where I stand on development is I want it to be voluntary. Like communities form organically. Like
yes.
Like take Detroit, which has been the biggest failure of a city ever. Detroit, Baltimore. Okay. Go back to the 60s again. The mayor of Detroit back in 61, Jerome. I forget his name. I should be able to look it up. But anyway, the decline of Detroit's manufacturing base started when the city started taxing industry by launching their first local income tax, raising property taxes, and then the car manufacturers started moving out. And several years later, urban decay, blight, rot moved in. A large swath of the population left. And the tragedy of Detroit is people consider that city the American Paris, like a metropolis. It's like when you say the names of cities like Detroit, Baltimore, Camden, Newark, they're synonymous with crime, drugs, poverty. But 60 years ago, if you said the names of those cities, you were thinking of metropolis. You were thinking of a great place to live, jobs, a great place to live. And that's the tragedy of urban planning, of state intervention in the economy and housing. I mean, cities like Detroit were built up organically by people wanting to build factories there. Like there were resources like rivers, waters, mines near the city area, so it was an ideal place to build car plants. But then government bureaucrats with their mismanagement come in, they make people leave. And we saw a lot of that in New York during COVID. Like, we're going to close your small business. We're not going to let you go to work. We're going to let all these people run amok. And even before that, you had a trend of more people leaving blue states to go to red states. Now, of course, many of them will vote for the same policies, but people vote with their feet way more than they vote with their than they vote at the polls.
Right.
Like people don't want to be in an area with crime. They don't want to be in an area where there are a lack of jobs. Parents don't want their kids in a school that's failing them. When push comes to shove, people will leave.
Although, Darius, I think I have a different take on the demise of cities like Detroit and even Pittsburgh. I don't think it was so much the government bureaucrats who intermingled that led to the failure. It's simply free market. I mean, Detroit was once a prominent auto center of the world, but by the late 1970s and 80s, you had a lot of Japanese automobiles who made an entry into the market. And a lot of the consumers in the US decided that, well, we want Japanese cars because they're inexpensive, they're more reliable, and they were more fuel efficient. So I think it was because of the consumer sentiment that really changed that made places like Detroit no longer a hub for automobile. Likewise with Pittsburgh, I mean, it was one of the, once upon a time, it was, one of the major, power plants and manufacturing, and steel, right? Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's because of the global trade that propped up other nations having a more competitive advantage for steel industry.
Well, obviously, by the 1960s, the rest of the world had recovered from World War II. So America is not the only manufacturing game in the world. That's true. But even then, if you go back to when America became an industrial powerhouse, the Gilded Age, America was basically attracting millions upon millions of people for the railroads, the gold mines, etc. Notwithstanding racial tensions or whatever, America was very attractive to foreign investment for the business class because of low taxes, low regulation, and large swaths of land and opportunity. So, I mean, it's obviously true that the rest of the world began competing, and that's a good thing. I mean, competition, free trade, they do make new consumer products available to the consumer. They drive prices down. But even then, the cities like Detroit, the auto companies, they still could have adapted if not for the city's regulations and the unions. I think they hurt the competitiveness. If you want to keep jobs and businesses in a place, you don't want to tax them more. But yes, that's a valid point, Thomas. Yes.
So now let's go back to education, because I know that's one of the topics that you wanted to talk about. So
we were supposed to stick to the student loan issue, but we got all scatterbrained.
No, but I think a lot of these points will come back. So tell me this, right now, as we sit here in 2021, we have more educational options than ever, especially in higher ed. We have all different, hybrid models, online learning. You have option of going for a 2 years degree, 4-year degree. There's all kinds of program certificates. So the question is, why is it so expensive?
I'd be happy to, because the government keeps subsidizing colleges. And I better bring this up because in my bio, you mentioned I did my MBA abroad. The school in France I went to was a partner school of NJET. That's how I learned about them. they weren't exactly like the Harvard of France. I believe that's the school called NC, but the tuition at my French school was about $8,800 American, I think 7,000 euros. That was for a 1-year MBA program. And my rent staying over there was about $200 American, was about 120 euros a month. So it was very cheap, but again, you have to factor in certain things. Number one, the standard of living in the average European country is lower than the average standard of living in America, obviously by New York metro area standards. So there's that. Also, European schools, they don't have a lot of the trimmings an American college would. Like in Europe, you don't have high school or college sports. The sports are done by club associations that compete with each other. Like, you know how you go to American college, you'll see a big football stadium, a big soccer field. The European school I went to, they didn't have that. They didn't have a big dining hall. The schools were much smaller. And not just because the population size in most European countries is smaller, but it was just a smaller environment. Like obviously, if you were doing scientific research, you would probably want to do it at an American school because they would have way more advanced lab equipment. Like I would say equipment wise, everything was, I don't want to sound mean, but let's say inferior. I mean, it's a business program, so we don't really need textbooks. We're using PowerPoint slides, but the library it paled in comparison to the NJIT library. And we've had to pay to print things, and the housing space for my little loft apartment, although it was cheap, it was very small. So that would explain things. So there are cultural differences, and also to the way it's paid for. Because this is going to come up. In European countries, everyone on average is taxed more than in the US. Like in the US, the average person is taxed 20 to 30% by the federal government. You might get some returns based on your deductions, and then depending on your state, that's another 5 to 10, maybe 15%. In the average European country, you're taxed automatically 40 to 50%, not just factoring in a higher average income tax, but also the VAT tax, the consumption taxes are much higher. And in like the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, which Bernie Sanders loves to say we need to copy, the rich, middle class, and poor alike, on average, will pay a minimum of 60% in taxes.
Jeez.
So the thing is, everyone is paying for this system, and also in these smaller countries, they're tinier and more homogenous. So yes, college is more available, but again, if we're working with smaller populations, it's like in order to properly mimic their college system or their healthcare system, you couldn't really do it on a nationwide scale. You would have to focus it more on the state level. Like you would have to get rid of a lot of these sports facilities, unnecessary facilities tied to learning, and you would have to jack up the average person's taxes. Because I mean, in some parts of Europe, like in Sweden, you might have schools that are free tuition. Okay, that's paid for by taxes, but it's not just the rich people paying more. Everyone is paying more because there's that homogeneity, not just in terms of race, but culture. When you see other people in your society more like yourself, you're less likely to mind paying higher taxes. But the thing is, in America right now, we're very homogenous, not just racially, but culturally. Like, I can't see people in California wanting to pay more taxes so people in Texas could have a program and vice versa. It would be an easier sell to say, you know what, in California, we want single-payer healthcare. We want free college. Okay, we're going to pay for it with our state taxes. Obviously, some people are going to leave, but it's going to be an easier sell than saying everyone in America has to pay more taxes for free college.
Right. Well, also, we in Europe, a lot of times these Nordic state countries, they pay more, but they get more for it, for better or worse. They get a lot more benefit, stronger safety net. In America, if you tax the crap out of people, the middle class, it would break them. I mean, people are already on the verge of, a breaking point. So I agree. It really should be, I think, a bottom-up experiment state by state based on what people truly value. Like, I would like to see California try a single payer system. I'm very open to that. I'd like to see Texas try a free market system based on, something more in line with what they think will work. And let's see what works. Let's do a kind of political Jeet Kune Do and adopt what works and discard what doesn't, and let people suffer the consequences within reason. We should still have a safety net, but I feel like that's better than the hybrid sort of system we have now, which is definitely not free market, but it's not a strong safety net either. It's very much a corrupt sort of revolving door crony capitalist system that both capitalists and socialists hate. And that's why I think people are starting to force the conversation. And when Occupy started, I remember Zuccotti Park, I was, talking to all the different people involved in that and stuff. And there was like a hidden agreement between the coffee party and the tea party, and they're on some level saying the system's broken. But special interests got involved, and then these movements started to really fissure and break apart. So I feel like, there's a conversation we need to have about how broken our system is.
Yeah, because it's not often referenced, but the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution have often been left out in our discourse. The states do have rights. Like whenever someone talks about states' rights, they're just talking about the Civil War or Jim Crow. It's like, no. Outside of the previous 8 amendments, the states were meant to be separate entities. Like, even though I oppose government intervention, like welfare and government schooling, it is still more constitutional to do those things at the state level than at the federal level. Like environmental regulations, education standards, healthcare. It's better to do them at the state level because at least then the bureaucrats are more accountable to the people who live there. And if you're, let's say I live in New Jersey, if you're a bureaucrat from Trenton, it's an easier visit for me to talk to you than if I have to go to Washington and make my case to my congressman or whatever. And likewise, you know the terrain better, you're closer to the actual problems. And because going into like healthcare, the British single payer system, I forget what it's called. Let me look
NHS.
it up. Yeah, the NHS. The NHS has been known to have supply problems. It's been known to be very, very poor on performance. But the Scottish NHS, because it's more decentralized to the regions and the states, it's been known to be better equipped to deal with the needs of the people. I mean, I would still prefer a full-on free market solution, but if you are going to have government intervention, it should be more decentralized to the states and localities.
Well, also, do you feel that there's a difference in culture when it comes to how we look at higher education? I feel like in a lot, and I lived in Europe for a number of years when I was in the Army, and I speak German and a number of other languages, and I really got immersed in these countries, in the places I lived, and I noticed some staunch differences in mindset. A lot of European countries do not view college as a lifestyle of partying and playing flip cup. They view it as you're there to learn. It's a pathway for higher education, period. Whereas in America, it's sort of like a rite of passage. Like you're there to learn, but you're also there to have a social life. And you're there to party, you're there to, and there's all these amenities and entitlements and things like that. And the truth is, if you go back to the ancient Greeks and the philosophy behind higher education, I think every human being has the innate capacity and desire to continually seek knowledge. But university is not for everybody. That is not a condescending statement. It's not saying people are better than other people. It's just saying it's really hard work. It took me forever to get a 4-year degree. It's not for everybody. A lot of people don't want to be there, and they shouldn't have to be there. Trade school is absolutely a good pathway to jobs. A lot of people who go through trade school are better paid than college graduates stacked in debt. So we force-fed this idea that everyone has to go to college. No, they don't. it should be a pathway to higher education. Anyone who really wants to go, I think, should probably be given an olive branch to be able to go. I think inequality should be eliminated when it comes to going to college. It should be based on merit, but it's not for everybody. And there's nothing wrong with trade school. And I feel like that mindset, there's a mindset difference in America. We look at college as like a birth, it's like a rite of passage when you're in your early 20s to go chug beer upside down. And like, and I don't know, do you think that's factored into the differences in how we inflated these college amenities and created this bubble that doesn't need to exist?
I mean, I can't really speak on Europe culturally for college, but as far as America goes, if you go through a K through 12 institution, you really are indoctrinated with the idea that if you don't go to college, you'll be a loser. You'll
Right.
either end up in prison, at McDonald's, or I said prison and McDonald's. What was the other one I was gonna say? But anyway, it's like
Living in a van down by the river.
it's something like that. Like, but the point is, I mean, yes, like you brought up trades. I don't remember them having blue collar trades at my high school, and I went to a magnet school. It's like we've demonized manual labor. It's like whenever you hear someone talk about blue collar trades, you'll always hear them say, "Well, that's good for some people, but my child's going to college." Like, and I get where that comes from, because obviously, let's go back to the 60s again. 5% of high school graduates went to college. Today, well over 40% go. I think 77% of all high school grads go to college at least once. But the point is, if you went to college, you were basically guaranteed a job 50 years ago, like whatever you wanted to do. Even if you went to the liberal arts, which wasn't as politicized as it is today, you were basically guaranteed some form of middle-class income. An employer would say, "Oh, wow, you went to college? You must be super duper smart." Because think about who went to college back then. You were either wealthy, very hardworking, or very bright. But now we've lowered academic standards to encourage equality. We encourage everyone to go to college because that's seen as the ticket to the middle class.
Right. So
And I think as far as race is concerned, I guess a lot of liberal academics, they basically see telling minorities to get trades as a form of racism. It's like, oh, if you're a minority, you should go to college just like white children. Like, you don't want to be a garbage man, even though the garbage man makes more than the teacher. You don't want to fix cars, even though the mechanic makes more than the teacher. You don't want to be a carpenter, even though a carpenter can make more than a teacher. You want to be a teacher. You want that 50 grand in debt and that 30K starting salary. Like we really have demonized blue collar. Even people like me, as much as I would like to live the Hank Hill lifestyle, I never brought it upon myself to learn how to fix a car or I mean, I'll do a little bit of plumbing work, but we really have demonized blue collar work because it's physically difficult. Like, you really have to look at someone who does blue collar work 10, 20 years. You're going to be sore. You're likely to be injured. There's always a trade-off. And yeah, blue collar work used to be more dangerous. Like if you were a train worker pounding nails in the tracks, if you were a construction worker, obviously even manual labor is safer today, but yeah, work was dangerous and toil. So I get why a lot of parents push college over blue collar work because it has its trade-offs, but we really have demonized work. I mean, have you ever seen this poster where in a lot of guidance counselors' offices, there's the happy college student with their diploma and their cap and gown, and next to him, there's the sad, hunched over factory worker with a wrench. He's all dirty. It's like, work smarter, work harder. And then people like Mike Rowe have to come out and show, hey, why don't you work smarter and work harder?
Yeah. Well, also, like, people don't realize college is not physically easy. That's a myth. Like, unless you're a savant, sitting down for 2.5 hours in class, day after day, being mentally attuned to what's going on. That's physically hard when you're losing sleep, when you're popping Adderall to study for exams, pulling all-nighters. It's actually very physically draining on your body, and it's physiologically taxing to go through college. Being a car mechanic and just doing your job if you love doing it, that person is probably mentally and physically way more relaxed after work than someone going through college. Like, that, college never ends. You're always studying, you're always pushing yourself.
Not necessarily. I mean, I remember in my college days, like the college schedule was always very lackadaisical. It wasn't like high school where from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, you're in school, you're going in between classes, lunch at 12. Like, no, when I was in college, it was like, depending on your schedule, you might have 8:30 class Monday or Tuesday, then no class until 1. Maybe Tuesday, you don't have a class. Wednesday, you might have that 6 to 9. So there was always that very open shotgun schedule where depending on the day, you'd either have a lot of class, some class, no class. So you had to always level up on your time management. And I guess the thing is always proper time management, because if I was running on all cylinders, if I kept up with my material, I'd do great. But whenever I started to fall behind, I'd end up in catch-up mode and I'd slack off, procrastinate. But one of the worst things is, I think in college we have the curve system, and when I was in Europe, I have to believe they do curves even worse, because in the grading system here, we have 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 B, the D is passing. Wasn't always, but 60, 69. Okay, right. At my French school, if you got at least a 50, you passed. Wow. Like apparently an A is 70, and if you get 90, that's like a super A. So it's like, wait a minute.
I want to go through that system.
No. Like, seriously, a 50 was passing. Like, if you got 50 here, it's like you failed. You got an F. It's like 50 is passing.
Wow. Also, I think GPA is a terrible way to calculate people's progress. I mean, I know it's necessary, like on the extremes. Like if you have a very low GPA, that's a red flag. If you have an exceptionally high GPA, you should be rewarded with a scholarship. But in general, a GPA is, you could be doing everything well, and one mistake drops you down, and it's very hard to pull it back up. It's actually a way to measure progress. Grade-wise.
I think the real problem with GPA is, well, this goes back to the problems with public school in general, but college is like, it's a holistic average of all your courses. Like, you're going to have some kids who are consistently in the honor roll, the valedictorian kids. They're awesome at basically every class. The kids who struggle, they're going to suck at some classes or most of them. And then the kids in the middle, they'll be B, C, D average. The thing is, the school system, at least K through 12, is not meant to really specialize and get good at one or two subjects to really maximize your potential. Like take Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan went to college and his degree was geography. Now, obviously, he saw a lot of geography when he was traveling with the Chicago Bulls, but I don't think we really cared what Michael's math grades were. All we cared, we saw the 23 on the court. He was there. He was in college to play ball as a gateway to the NBA. We don't care what he studied or why he studied. I mean, yeah, athletes, they'll pick the easy class, but think about that. Like, if you're very talented in music, you're probably going to do well in your music classes. Maybe you do well in your other classes, maybe you don't. But if you're making a career out of music, obviously you should have a backup plan, but you want to maximize it at that. If you're a math guy and you're not very good at writing, yeah, you could work on it. But if you're really passionate about mathematics and science, you really want to hone in on that. That's not what public school is known for. It's like, you gotta kind of be good at everything to really see your GPA as acceptable. Now, of course, college is supposed to focus on that, because when you major in a subject, obviously that's what your degree program is in. But another thing that they do that ruins the program is we want you to be well-rounded. We're gonna make you take GRE requirements in classes, even though you're an engineer, and we're gonna make you take 7 humanities classes, 2 gym classes. Like, I mean, yeah, I might want to go to the gym, but why are you forcing me to take a gym class? Like, I'm here for engineering, or I'm here for business, or this and that. It's like that's just another way they milk tuition out of you.
Yeah, I think that's the underlying problem, Darius. I think these, whether if it's high schools or higher learning institutions, they try to make every student so well-rounded. In order to get a degree, you have to take all these electives, which you'll never use. I think in theory, it's probably a good idea, because you want someone coming out of college to have some of the, background information about, the skills and the tools that you'll need. I think that, model is based on the 1950s and 60s economy. I mean, the economy has changed so much. There's really no reason why you should, focus on art history or, literature if you're going to be focusing on, science or STEM, courses. And I think this kind of goes to kind of the demise of manufacturing in the US, because one country that's very interesting to look at is Germany, because they are the engineering powerhouse of the EU. And that's because they have an incredible apprenticeship programs, trade schools, and it's actually pretty worthy of having like an honor when you go to these places instead of a college. So I think we really need to reimagine what it is to go to a place of higher learning that's not your traditional 4-year college institutions.
Isn't that ironic? After World War I and World War II, Germany becomes the economic powerhouse of Europe. That's so ironic, but yes.
Well, I mean, we carpet bombed them and then forced them through the Marshall Plan to rebuild. So it was very much sort of a really just completely like rebuilding everything from the mindset to the idea. I mean, ideologically and materially and economically, that was a very sort of shock and awe, top to bottom, reboot, sort of, so to speak. But that's rare. I think that's the exception, not the rule. Same thing with South Korea. Did really well once they, after the Korean War. Like South Korea was buffered off from the North Korean aggression, so they were able to really embrace, a very healthy system of development.
I wouldn't say their success is totally based on U.S. foreign aid, although it helped, because
right.
When you look at when you look at West Germany versus East Germany, both nations are getting funding from their counterparts, the U.S., Soviet Union, North Korea, South Korea. They're both being financed. If you look at a case study, you have two nations that were once one, the same race, same culture, same mythology, same religious background, but the economic system. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't call West Germany and South Korea full-on free market, but a more market-oriented Keynesianism versus much more authoritarian socialism. Yeah, you're going to yield drastic results. Like even China after Mao. China couldn't be a better example of Nazism in the world today. But again, China moving away from Mao and embracing some free trade, some market orientation yielded so much return for the people in terms of economic output, consumption. Like a little bit of freedom is all it really takes to improve the economy and the lives of the people.
Right. Yeah, and I think also a lot of it's about a virtuous cycle where the more economic inclusion and participation and rights people have, the stronger a middle class is going to start to form, which means more political involvement. And then it becomes a virtuous cycle between political freedom and democracy. And free enterprise and upward mobility. And I think a strong safety net really does help that process. I don't believe in, top-down sort of forcing free markets on countries. I think that ends up in disaster. But I think when it happens organically, and you do have political freedoms alongside economic freedom with a reasonable safety net, I think that fosters economic growth and political freedom hand in hand. And I think the correlates of democracy and economic prosperity really show this, at least in the aggregate, in the macro sort of global scale. And
I'm sorry. You were going to say something at the end?
Oh, no, that was it. I think even most liberals will do that,
Going into the safety net, because with college, okay, in hindsight, we kind of know all this, but then the problem is, what do we do about the tens of millions of student loan borrowers today? Like, do you feel loan forgiveness is ideal, or should something else be implemented? Because I'm of the opinion that loan forgiveness is a bad idea, because obviously reason number one is moral hazard and agency theory. Like the banker bailouts of 2008, you're just rewarding people's failure at the expense of other people. Like I'm ashamed to admit this, but I personally did have 50 grand in student loans, from the bulk of which came from living on campus. Even though I had some scholarships, and in hindsight, if I could do it over again, I don't think I would have gone to college, but I now only have about $5,000 left in student loans. I paid for it through work and a little bit of my Doge money this year. So I'm in a much better state than a lot of these student loan protesters. But the practical advice I would give is, if you're a college graduate with a substantial amount of student loans, for the time being, take advantage of the freeze, get your house in order, get the best job you can, and then work from there. Try to consider getting a second job, or better yet, if your degree wasn't that useful in getting a good job, consider looking up some new skills, some new online programs maybe. Consider a trade, an apprenticeship, an online program, anything that is likely to get you a better paying job. Start investing after you have at least 3 to 6 months worth of savings, because the stock market today is very speculative. If you don't have time to do your research, just put your money in the S&P 500. But because the thing is, a lot of these people that are getting coverage in the debt collective, they're really just hoping for Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders to sway Joe Biden to wave his magic wand and forgive their loans. And if you look at a lot of these people, I'm of the opinion that even if they got their loan forgiveness, a lot of them would still be in poor financial straits, because there are people who have paid off their debts. There are people who have leveled up after getting a worthless degree or having a lot of debt. And they're across the political spectrum. So it is possible. Like, obviously, going into the future, I think number one, we need to have bankruptcy of student loans, because it's the only debt you can't declare bankruptcy on. Number two, I think the government needs to get out of student loans in the first place. Like, when you go to a bank for a business loan or a car loan, they want to check your credit score. They're going to ask you, hey, can you pay me back on time? The government doesn't do that. They'll say, oh, well, I'm getting a degree in gender studies. I'm not exactly sure what job I'm going to get right now. I'm just exploring. Or even if you're not the stereotype, if you're going to college and you're not really sure what you're going to do, and you're asking me for a loan, I'm going to say no, or I'm going to ask you a crap ton of questions before I give you my hard-earned money, because banks are supposed to make loans to people who are responsible to collect that interest. If you're not a financially worthy person, the best thing for both the bank and the borrower is to say no. So
Hey, can I ask you a question, Darius? So I know you had mentioned moral hazard, and it sounds like you are against the cancellation of student debt. However,
Yes.
at the same time, you would be in favor of letting student loans be discharged through personal bankruptcy, like Chapter 7, right?
Yes.
So, I mean,
Because
isn't that the same thing? I mean, essentially, if the government's not going to cancel it, then you just file for bankruptcy.
no, they're not the same thing, because bankruptcy will affect your credit score. It's like people, like in the future, when your credit score takes a hit that you couldn't pay off loans, yeah, you can walk away from that debt, but there's still a mark that banks, credit card companies, intermediaries, they're gonna look at you. It's like there is a punishment for this, but the point is, someone has got to learn the lesson that you can't just keep throwing good money after bad. You can't just throw your money down a rat hole and then expect life to just, oh, just bail me out. Like, forgiveness would just wipe away the debt. No problem, nothing from you. Because the thing is, when you agree to a loan, you're responsible to pay it back. But if you get bailed out, you're basically saying, I'm not going to pay this loan. I'm not responsible. And then, well, I guess my main point is, what is that going to say about the college system, where if 40 to 50% of the graduates need to be bailed out, if they can't pay their loans back by working, that's going to blow a whole hole in the system's reputation, where it's like, so you're going to borrow all this money, piss it away, and not be able to pay it back. What was the point? And employers are going to look at college graduates. I know I'm jumbled around, but the point I want to say is it's really going to ruin the reputation of college even more so, because now people are going to see college as a joke even more so, which might not be a bad thing.
I mean, it sounds like there needs to be a logical alignment between, like for example, with lending and borrowing, there's the element of risk. And if you remove the element of risk, if people know they're going to continually just get bailed out, or they're just the money's going to be returned to them through these bailouts, then it seems like there'll be no incentive for there to be a self-correction within the cost of things. So like, is there any way for the cost of school to be reined back into something reasonable, where, students who are not going to get a degree that's going to, likely lead to their being able to pay back the loan, they probably shouldn't get the loan, but at the same time, the cost should go down. I think there's a lot of things that need to realign based on some kind of economic logic. Is that even possible? I mean,
Yeah, it actually is possible. By not subsidizing schools, by making it harder for them to get money from the government, they're going to be more selective about the kids they enroll. Because basically these days, because of the way the political establishment has pimped college, it's seen as something everyone should do. But no, if colleges were like, you know what, no. We have the best engineering program we can create. We only want the cream of the crop. We want meritocracy. We only have a select amount of spots like the Ivy League. We're only going to take in a certain amount of people. And I mean, if you wanted to have supply controls, you could legislate a supply control that would force the price down, where the schools will only take X amount of people. And that would make tuition lower for those select few. So that could be an implemented policy. But I think the real solution has to be ending the subsidization of the schools, because when colleges receive billions in grants and student loan money, they can spend a lot of money on those buildings, on those theater halls, lecture halls. I mean, for like engineering programs that need laboratories, science equipment for like medical research, that's an appropriate capital expenditure. But does a school really need another freaking football field? I mean, couldn't the NFL just have like another youth league and outsource that? Do we really need college football, college basketball?
I mean,
That's a good question. There's a map that Anat came across. It's a color-coded world map showing the demand of tertiary school enrollment. So this would be like post-secondary education levels, whether if you got a master's degree, PhD. Let's take a look at this map. I think it's dated from 2010, so it's a bit outdated. But if you look at the color coding, I mean, it shows the US as being one of the most educated places in the world in terms of the tertiary education. What do you think?
Yeah, we do have a high proportion of college enrollment and master's degrees. I mean, some position. I guess this is what they call accreditation, where it's like, oh, a bachelor's isn't what it used to be. You better get your master's. Like if you're a teacher and you want to get that promotion, or if you're working in corporate America, you better get the MBA. Like, yeah, I fell for that. Like, I got my master's immediately after my bachelor's because one of the reasons was my mom was on me. It's like, well, you better get it early because you might want to get it later. It'll show you're driven. It's like, I mean, obviously for some positions like accounting, you want to get that CPA so you can move up at the Big Four. If you're in medical school, you obviously have to get your doctorate to be a doctor or get your jurisprudence to be a lawyer. But I guess a lot of people with bachelor's degrees see it as a necessary step to progress, get that master's degree so you can move up the corporate ladder. It's more hype than reality in non-specific roles, but it has taken a hold of the culture.
Well, also, I was going to ask, there seems to be like a Schrodinger's cat kind of a quantum contradiction when it comes to the way millennials are looked at. And I myself am like, would technically be a millennial as well. This has always really cut deep with me. So we're often told, well, you know, if you don't go to college, that's your fault. You should have gone to college to get economic mobility. But if you do go, even if it's in something useful, and you do everything you're told to do, then you have this crushing student debt. But then the value of your degree is no longer there because of this bubble. So due to this economic policy that is no fault of your own, you are then crushed with all this debt. Then a lot of these same people will say, well, you know what? You know, and I'm talking about some people that, you know, some boomers, et cetera, will say, you know, well, you chose to take on that debt. That's your fault. So wait a minute. If I don't take on the debt, it's my fault. You want me to pay for everything and work hard for it. But if I do choose to take on the debt, then it's also my fault. A lot of people feel like there's no winning.
Yeah.
Rigged.
Yeah, it's the damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, this is literally where the okay boomer meme comes from. Annette, if you can hear me, post the okay boomer meme in the background, because it's like did you ever have a parent who was like, you need to go to college? Like, if you were unsure, it's like, you're going to college. And I'm a younger millennial, like born in 94, went to college in 2012. And I remember the student loan issue was still gaining traction. Like, over $1 trillion in student loan debt had been accrued by 2011. And I was wondering, how am I going to pay for college? And of course, this is when, the economy overall after the Great Recession was still lagging for most of the Obama years. Like, even though the unemployment rate went down, labor force participation was still declining from like 66% to like 63%. And like Peter Schiff, he did this famous video where, have you seen the one where he goes to New Orleans on the Strip and he's interviewing all those people working as bartenders and security guards, and they're like, did you go to college? Like, yes, I did, Mr. Schiff. What did you study? Marketing, humanity, communications. It's like, I mean, it was a big rip. I mean, stereotypes aside, there are a lot of millennials who feel understandably frustrated. It's like, wait a minute. I was told my whole life, if I wanted to avoid the kitchen, I just had to go to college and everything would just be okay. I would be okay. And you feel lied to. Because college was basically pimped as Disneyland. Like, if you just went and you studied and you work hard, you'd be okay. Like, and a lot of them are figuring out, no, that's not necessarily true. I I mean, for some people, if you networked properly, or if you had a good degree, or you were just a little bit lucky, yeah, that is true. But there is that bottom 40% that ended up underemployed, unemployed after college, during the Great Recession, during COVID. All the while, there are millions of jobs opened up, and yeah, that is a very difficult situation to be in. Like I was in that situation after I left school. Admittedly, there were some things I could have done better with my networking and persistence, but gosh, I remember when I finished my master's, it was a hard job hunt. I had to go through over 2,000 job applications, about 20 interviews, 3 job offers, one in insurance sales, another at some marketing job. Like you ever see those medical alert devices? I've fallen and I can't get up.
Oh,
And then I ended up at the government, the city of Newark. I was a tax assessment analyst, and I did that for a while. And I hated working there because I felt like such a hypocrite, like Mr. Conservative, Mr. Liberty. Yes, I was the most Republican student in college, but here I am, a government bureaucrat. I mean, sure, I was making like $50K a year and I was paying things off, but
no, that's good.
yeah, I was like,
That government cheese, man. I really don't. I've had government
yes,
jobs.
yes. And after a while, I started networking with a few of my college friends and started learning things about programming on the side. And then the pandemic hit, and I had a little bit of money in stocks and crypto, and I just worked from there. I finally got a new job, and so obviously, my advice to any millennial, regardless of what happened, is take stock of your situation now. Find the best job you can. If your degree can't help you, find a new program, learn some new skills, start networking, and improve your situation. Because if you're hoping Biden or someone else is going to fix your life, you're going to be waiting a long time, because the federal government actually did have a student loan forgiveness program. But basically, you had to work in a government job, like a teacher or a civil service job, for like 10 years. You make 120 payments, and then they forgive your loan. But even after being enacted for several decades, only a small minority of people ever really got the forgiveness. Now, I don't know what Biden is going to do, but ironically, Biden has been very conservative with his application of loan forgiveness. Like on the campaign trail, you're thinking, when I get in office, I'm going to forgive all corn pops dead. But then when he got in, Biden was weirdly hesitant. It's like, well, let me think about this. Let me think about the Constitution. It's like, you who initiated the Iraq war, the drug war, all these big government programs, now all of a sudden you care about the Constitution. It's like, I mean, political. But even a lot of progressives were like, wait a minute, you said you were going to do this lickety split. What happened? Like even Trump, he did the whole freeze with the Higher Education Act. It's like, yeah, but I'm gonna get around. I'm thinking, let me talk to Corn Pop and Fat about it.
Well, not only that, but Biden was the co-sponsor of the 2005 tax bill that President George W. Bush signed. Because prior to 2005, you could actually discharge your student loans through bankruptcy, but that law prohibited the discharge of student loans. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Joe Biden comes from the state of Delaware. That's the home of all these banks and credit card companies. So, his constituents were these big banks. So he was certainly, protecting their interests over student loan interests. Well, anyway, let's take a look at the next video that we have queued up. I think this one is entitled Solving Student Debt. I think it's a commentary by John Stossel. So if that video is ready, let's take a look.
Can you guys hear it?
No, it looks like the volume is off. Anyway, we'll come back to that when that video is ready. But I mean, there's no doubt that it is a bubble. So what do you do with it?
Yeah, I've seen this
Student
one.
loan debt, a national crisis.
I'm in debt $70,000.
Student loan debt keeps growing. The last administration blamed greedy bankers taking big profits.
Unnecessary middlemen in administering student loans.
So government would take over student
I hear
loans.
Obama still
We
has
take the
student loan debt
middleman out. We
from
take the
Harvard.
banker out of the picture because they're taking a profit.
We'll save American taxpayers $68 billion.
But instead, the cost to taxpayers went up and student debt increased.
13 years ago, the average new college graduate owed $20,000 in student loans. Today, that number has jumped to $37,000.
What are you guys doing to help us with the student loan debt?
Some politicians are still so eager to blame banks, they don't even know that they kicked banks out of the loan business.
Who would like to answer first?
We stopped making student loans in
I wouldn't
2007 or
trust
so.
Maxine
Mr.
more than
Diamond?
anything
When the
financial.
government took over student lending in 2010 or so, we stopped doing all student lending.
If actual private lenders, people with skin in the game, made college loans, they'd care about being paid back. They'd tell students which majors often lead to higher paying careers and warn them that majoring in, say, sociology, art history, or gender studies might make it tougher to get out of debt.
If I'm a young person going to college, the federal government doesn't tell me that the amount that I'm borrowing is probably going to be unaffordable for me because I'm on a path towards a low earnings occupation.
Beth Akers of the Manhattan Institute is the author of Game of Loans. Under the government program, no student has a reason even to think about, will I earn money?
That's right. We charge everyone the same interest rate, and we give them the same caps on how much they can borrow.
Currently, many students are really dumb about their loans. 28% don't even know they have a loan.
It's not
many
because they're
people like
dumb,
this.
it's because we've made a system that's really complex.
Today, activists say, just make college free. Forgive all the loans.
It ends up giving very large benefits to people who probably don't need it.
So it would be welfare for the rich.
It sure would.
A better solution, says Akers, is something called an ISA,
Income
an
share
income
agreement.
share agreement.
So you want to be a web developer? Sign up. Pay nothing up front. That's right, nothing.
Some private computer education boot camps do that.
That gets them into a career, most often in coding.
Those people were getting jobs.
Yeah, the ISA was a way for the school to say to them, you're only going to pay us if we help you succeed.
Now, some colleges offer ISAs. Graduates who get jobs repay the loans by paying the college a percentage of their income.
In the past 5 years, people are starting to get excited and try to implement income share agreements.
At first, I had no idea how I was going to move forward and pay for my education.
Engineering student Paul Aurora was thrilled to learn that Purdue would help him get an ISA loan. So was Andrew Hoyler, who's just started working as a pilot. Now that he has a job, he must pay the university 8% of his income for 104 months.
So after that 104-month term ends, if you still have money that you owe, it's forgiven. It's forgotten. You don't owe another penny. Now, if I find myself in a six-figure job tomorrow, there's a chance that I'll pay back far more than I initially took out.
But you're okay with that?
I'm okay with that. The security of knowing that I'll never pay back more than I can afford every month was enough for me.
If it's so good for you, I think it would be bad for the investor.
It's a risk that they take, just like an investment.
It conveys information to the student about how lucrative a different major is going to be.
English majors must pay 4.5% of their income for 116 months. Math majors pay 4% for just 96 months.
Some people think that's unfair, but really that's just a way that they can recapture the amount of money that they've put up in the first place.
This is new, useful information about what professions pay.
Not only what they pay, but how stable it may be, what the future is like. It may even sway students away from going into majors that don't have job prospects post-graduation.
The English major has to pay 116 months. Your loan is over 30 months sooner.
It's definitely something to look forward to, that I can stop paying people quicker.
We should think about investing in students the same way that we invest in startups. Share equity in their company.
Basically put the students in touch with rich people.
It may be that there are rich investors feeding money into that fund, but it's not an individual connection between students and investors.
We don't know who the investor is, but I'd love to, give him a hug or buy him a beer or something.
The institutions are saying, hey, if I'm operating as the middleman, in a sense, I can make sure that no one's taking advantage of my students.
Still, some call ISAs predatory. This is like indentured servitude. You're locked into paying for all these months.
And if you're graduating, you don't have a job, you're not paying anything. So where's the servitude in that?
It's a brand new industry. The public's still learning, the investors are still learning. They really care about the students. It is a win-win situation for everyone involved in it.
I'm happy to say all the major New York City coding boot camps offer income share agreements now. So, and even a lot of colleges, they're starting to wise up where I've been hit up by my alumni group, and they offer like 1-year courses. Like if you went into school for like a CS degree, now they have the 1-year alternative that's like a boot camp, but it's stretched out over 10 months. They still try to charge 17 to 20 grand, but that's a much better alternative than the 4-year program. 1, because it saves a lot of time. 2, you're not taking unrelated classes. And I think this is going to be a benefit in the future, because it's not just the money, it's the time investment. Like if you're a young person, your biggest asset is your youth. That's the trade-off. The older you get, the more likely you're going to have more money. The younger you are, the younger you are. But also, yes, income share agreements, they are a positive step in the right direction.
That's really interesting. I never thought of that, never heard of it. And I like being exposed to counter opinions. So like I tend to be in favor of some degree of student loan, maybe at a lower level based on need. But I like hearing counter narratives that force me to challenge my assumptions.
They also do that.
A really interesting idea to explore. And this might realign the incentives between lender and college and student a little more logically, so it doesn't spiral out of control, But yeah, that was a very interesting video. I think food for thought.
Yeah, a lot of those online programs, the most common loan provider for tuition is called Climb. All the major coding boot camps, Hack Reactor, Full Stack Academy, Flatiron, General Assembly, they all do that for like full stack development, data science, digital marketing, cybersecurity. So it's good they're competing with colleges. And they have various payment plans. Maybe you pay it all up front if you got the bread. If you don't, there are payment plans.
Cyber is very interesting because it's not a traditional manual labor type job, at least not stereotypically, but it is a very high income pathway.
Yes.
But it's sort of like a trade skill. It's not academic, it's a trade skill, but it's a high income pathway, and it's not your typical manual labor. So the cyber realm is its own sort of quadrant, as opposed to this false dichotomy of academia versus manual labor, where like there'll be this sort of space in there for coding and cybersecurity and things like that.
I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, the whole tech world is its own thing, where it's like you got blue collar work, manual labor. You got white collar, which is more administrative, academic. I mean, I guess we would call it tech collar, where it is kind of white collar in that you're in an office, but you're really working with the technology so much that it's you really are like a line worker. But yeah, data science, analytics, that probably is more white collar because you're working in a corporate office making reports and stuff. Yeah, I've had time to really look up the different options, but yes, all those options exist. I would call it tech collar because you're specializing in the technology.
That's
I guess
interesting.
some of the limitations about the ISA would be like, what if you don't graduate from college? How do you pay?
If you don't graduate, you don't pay, and you're scrammed out. You don't get your certificate. If you finish the course, you'll have to pay tuition plus X amount. Like let's say the tuition at the boot camp is like 17 grand. They may have it where, okay, in total, you got to pay 1.5 times, at most more than double. Like, I think they've said over the course of 4 years, if you get an appropriate tech job, like it's not enough to where you just end up in a job. You have to end up in the job, like programmer, cybersecurity, data science job, the type of job you actually went to the program for. And you have to make a certain amount, like at least 50K or more. You'll pay back an amount between 25K to 40K at the most. So there are rules and stipulations, and it will show up on your credit report.
That's interesting. A friend of mine went to Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, and that school is famous for having like these independent studies, which means you could basically make up your own curriculum under the guidance of your academic advisor. So my friend got a degree in like anthropology and something like human ecology, kind of like the intersection of it. So I guess under this ISA, I mean, you can't really, have those independent studies because,
Is it Evergreen, the school where the teacher or where the students turned on the teachers and rioted?
Yeah, Brett Weinstein, yeah. Yep.
Oh God, what are you doing going to Evergreen? Oh God, no.
Yeah. Well, Evergreen used to be known for, it's kind of like, the Berkeley of Washington State. And I guess back in the day, they were more, pro First Amendment, freedom of expression, but it's become a lot more reclusive, I guess, in the recent decades. So, and I guess the other thing about the ISA is it really kind of like narrows your selection of what majors to go into. I mean, if you want to major in, let's say, psychology, because when I was an undergrad, that was a very popular program. I don't think there's really much, like a market for that type of degree to, be incentivized in the work field.
I mean, if you specifically want to be a psychologist, a therapist, or if you want to work in academia, yeah, you'll need that degree. But I have to imagine less people are going to just pick psychology in that, well, I'm going to college, but I don't really know what to do, so I'll just pick this.
Well, the thing about degrees like psychology, sociology, a lot of times you have to get a post-secondary degree, like a master's, MSW, PhD. So I wonder how that will work under this ISA. If you get an undergraduate degree, then you're continuing further education, do you need to start paying that back?
Well, the ISAs, they're really more for the alternative education companies like the boot camp programs. It will be interesting to see how the colleges would apply it. I mean, obviously Purdue is doing it, but I haven't really looked into how. Even Annette is wondering, how does Purdue do it? I guess we could look at Purdue's website. Let's go to Google real quick.
And from what I understand, Purdue is more like an engineering school, right? It's very heavy into science, agricultural studies, and engineering.
Okay. I'm at the Purdue Division of Financial Aid website. Income share agreements for students who need additional funding. There's now the Federal Parent Plus. Is now offering income share agreement called Backup Boiler ISA Fund. So I'm guessing the school is funding it through donors. Backup Boiler ISA Fund is available to Purdue sophomore, juniors. Okay, so you can't be a freshman. The funding is limited as the concept of ISA is new. Frequently, Ensure ISA is an agreement where you receive funding while you are in school. When you leave school, you will pay a fixed percentage of your income. For some students, this will make sense. For others, it won't. So there's not that much here. They have a frequently asked questions page, but basically it's set up as a fund within the school. So obviously the school knows their bread and butter mainly comes from Pell Grants, student loans, or general tuition. So they haven't really maxed it out. It looks like they're testing it to see where it goes.
Interesting. All right, well, we got to wrap it up here pretty soon. So before we do so, Darius, I want to ask you whether you have a book recommendation for us.
I mean, I guess books are another one of those outdated academic tools, because obviously books are great, but I think everyone spends more time listening to YouTubers or podcasts. I mean, Tim Pool, he's always great. He's got interesting guests. What's his name? Joe Rogan. Like, particularly the Joe Rogan podcast, because unlike a lot of cable news interviews where they'll go, we have this guest here, we'll talk to them for 2 minutes. That's all the time we have today. It's like, no. You watch the Joe Rogan podcast or Tim Pool, it's like they're sitting down for 2 to 3 hours. They're legitimately talking to a person, a guest. You're going to hear where they came from, why they feel what they feel. They'll even tell you some interesting stuff about them you never heard before, and that's a great way to converse, to have an exchange of ideas instead of a 2-minute. Like, you ever watch The View, or you ever watch, what's his name, Bill Maher? It's like, that's all the time we have today. It's like, you barely said anything. Right now, I don't really have any new books. Peter Lynch, One Up on Wall Street. I guess since we're talking about college, one of the biggest college bashing YouTubers is Aaron Clary. Anyone ever heard of Aaron Clary? Asshole Consulting, that's his YouTube channel. He has a book, Enjoy the Decline. Or better yet, his book, Worthless, where he breaks down basically STEM degrees are the good degrees, business and liberal arts are worthless. The more non-related to the private sector a degree is, the more worthless it is. How college tuition is basically a scam, how it's risen and the value of a degree has gone down in general, how education is too flooded. Worthless. Aaron Clary, that's a good pick for this topic, Worthless.
Hey, just curious. I know Joe Rogan Experience is kind of like a wide-ranging topics and guests, but it seems like a lot of these other YouTubers, like Timcast, it's always like there's a very small niche market, and they're always just talking about wokeism, cancel culture, the regressive left, and that's all they talk about, like 24/7.
No,
So,
but you have to understand the regressive left is basically the establishment. I mean, like take Black Lives Matter, for instance. The way their supporters see them, they're this civil rights organization speaking out against police brutality that's really taking the world by storm. But to the opponents of Black Lives Matter is basically a modern day Ku Klux Klan. And think of the Klan not as we think of them now, a despised terrorist organization with no real power anymore. Think of the Klan in the 1920s, where they were a mainstay of American culture, where businesses, corporations, churches would endorse the Klan presence. Like obviously you're familiar with the George Floyd incident last year. And everyone, even people who were relatively conservative, they saw George Floyd's video and they had sympathy for him. There was virtually no one in the country that looked at that and thought this was a good thing. They thought, how dare Derek Chauvin have his neck on George Floyd like that? How dare the police treat him like that? And what did Black Lives Matter do? They protested, and then the protests turned to riots. And what did the media do? They showed for them. You see the police station and various buildings on fire, but they're mostly peaceful. Black Lives Matter and Antifa went into Black neighborhoods, destroyed a bunch of businesses under their perception that, oh, Black people don't own these things. Black people don't own stores and businesses. And even if they didn't, what gave them the right to do that? Well, because they were in their self-righteous goal of protesting police brutality, they could get away with murder. David Dorn, say his name. But yeah, and the reason Tim Pool calls it out is because where are the right-wing groups like the Proud Boys getting away with mass waves of violence? Like, everyone's talking about January 6th, like it was this big terror threat. But the mainstream media won't talk about the rioting in Minneapolis. They won't talk about Portland or Seattle, the Chaz or Chop, where protesters literally killed a Black kid because they decided to become the police. Like, we're protesting the racist police brutality by engaging in racist police brutality. It's like, show me the quote unquote right-wing group that has that institutional power of receiving millions in donations from corporations and receiving establishment praise from the media. Like Black Lives Matter literally got the green light to do whatever they want.
All right, Darius, I think you lost me on when you compared BLM to the KKK. If your argument is basically there's this kind of corporate wokeism and they, give tremendous kind of, glamour to BLM, I think that's a fair assessment. But I just don't recall there being massive lynching by the BLM. Property damage, yes, and no one is, overlooking Portland, Seattle, and all those other places. That's a fair assessment. But to equate that then to massive lynching to a tune of
it probably would be more appropriate to Antifa, but yes, I mean there are openly racist organizations. Like the cover was, we're talking about police brutality and racial injustice, but there's this new wave of racism, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Like our culture has basically replaced pro-white racism with anti-white racism.
Well, I think the author Ibrahim Kendi would certainly, point out that the nation needs to be more anti-racist because it kind of needs to be rooted out from its core, and these are kind of the legacies of Jim Crow, the Klan, etc. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Love to have you come back on and talk about that.
Well, I guess we all got to get off around 10, especially at Nat. So I guess we'll part ways here. But it was a good conversation about student loans. If you can avoid them, you should. If you have them, try to figure out the best way to pay them off. Get a good job, get the best job you can, and work your way up from there. There are alternatives. If you have to, talk to your loan service provider to work something out. But don't wait on Joe Biden to pay them off for you, because he probably won't.
Cool. And that is the word from the wise. Darius, I appreciate you coming on. Hey, by the way, I don't think we've met in person, so hopefully one of these days.
Actually, we have met. Do you recall right before COVID, I was at one of the events downtown New York. I think Rob Guzman was in a debate on healthcare, and it was a natural rights versus positive rights. I saw you in person, and wait, that was another event. We were talking about issues. This must have been January or February 2020. I have met you in person.
We have. Okay, my apologies. I
know it's been such a long time.
Yeah,
so obviously live events will probably be popping up more. So we'll see each other in person. I'm quite tall and relatively pudgy, so I'm easy to spot out in a crowd.
Cool. Well, that's a good place to leave it. Thanks again, Darius, to our team, John, Anat. Take care. See you guys next time.
Yeah, bye.